Hey you, Dave here, and I'm customizing this Funko Pop Megatron for a friend of mine who's a big fan of Transformers. This one's going to be a little bit different from past projects where the battery and power switch could be stored in the base. This one has no base.
All your base are belong to us.
Also, this unibrow type thing is in the way of working on his eyes. The left hand looks like it wants to hold something, and the back of his head has some complex curves. So yeah, there's some new challenges. First off is breaking the body down into parts, and according to the internet, all it's needed is a big pot of really hot water and time, and some stuff to keep my hands from burning. Surprisingly, this worked really well in softening up the parts and the glue. Anytime connection points that gave me resistance, I just put them back in for a longer soak and tried again. Eventually, everything was separated and it was time to start drilling into the eyes. Once those holes were big enough, the head got clamped down so I could focus on making them exactly the size needed for the acrylic circles. Once they were good to go, work started on the access door. Some tape and measurements to show exactly where to cut, and then starter grooves with an X-Acto knife, followed by a scraper that slowly cut into the plastic and removed material. This technique gives me the most control while not warping or melting the plastic, and once it's deep enough I switched over to a tiny saw for the finish. All that, and now Megatron has holes in the front and back of his head. So far, so good. With the door cut, now it has to be easy to open, close, and stay in place. So it needs something kinda like a door frame. A trip to the dollar store got this container that was a pretty good color match, and after a lot of measuring, a medium amount of cutting, and a tiny bit of gluing, Megatron now has a head door frame thing. The biggest challenge to adding the on-off button to the door was cutting just the right amount of material so the button would stick out enough so it could be activated, but not too far or the drill would just go right through everything. Hot glue holds it all together and makes a really nice friction fit with the door frame. It's not going anywhere unless it's supposed to. Next, the eyes were built up with acrylic circles, LEDs, aluminum tape to increase brightness, and finally, electrical tape for light blocking, so the only things glowing are the eyes. To get the wiring to the hand, holes for the neck and chest were slowly drilled with increasing bit sizes. Oh yeah, it didn't take long to figure out what Megatron should hold. An old school glowing Energon cube. For the Energon, I found a variety pack of clear dice and decided to go with the pink ones. Drilled a hole for an LED, machine sanded the sides until the dots went away, a little hand sanding to get everything square, glued the LED in place, 5 or 6 coats of a Mod Podge acrylic paint mix to diffuse the light, a final wet sand to make everything super smooth, and now we've got an Energon cube for Megatron to hold. With the cube size finalized, the hand can now be opened up the right amount to hold it. As someone who uses their hands a lot, this whole part felt weird. Oh, I am so thankful for my thumbs. All the electrical stuff in Megatron's head got wired and installed. Then the wires for the Energon cube got woven through all the parts. This went way better than expected. The arm got reconnected to the body, the cube was positioned and held in place with a little bit of hot glue, and then all the body parts were back together again. With just a little bit more wiring, all the electrical stuff is done for the Decepticon leader, and then a little bit of filler and paint to cover up the drill holes. Megatron is looking good. Angry, but good. However, with the extra weight in his head, he's now even more top-heavy than before, so he definitely needs a light-up base. After some design time on the computer, and a visit to the public library laser cutter, all the layers to the custom base were mostly ready for assembly. The aluminum tape is going to help even out the lighting, which for this build is going to be some flexible filaments I found out about by watching Boyle Hobby Time. Check him out, it's a great channel. Speaking of channels, I made some in the substructure acrylic so metal can be put near the top of the base to attract the magnets that are going to be installed in Megatron's feet so he doesn't fall over. Once the acrylic was glued to the wood border, some really small nails fit into the channels after their heads had been removed. CA glue to lock them in place, and then the base got clamped on. Figured out where the flexible filament should be placed for the light to be even, and then drilled some holes so the wiring could get down to the power level. Because of the voltage requirements, the filaments had to be connected to the power source individually. I'd never wired filaments before, so testing things as I go has continued to be helpful in troubleshooting problems as they happen, instead of guessing what went wrong 10 steps later. Because guessing is the worst. The filaments got placed and then held with hot glue. This took a little while because the glue had to dry before moving on, but everything is exactly where I want it to be. A few quick tests and everything is still working, which is great. Time to move on to the power level. This port is just a little too tall to fit inside, so it got cut down to size. And because the wires are really close to the surface now, I double checked just to make sure it still works. It does. All the bits get placed and cut marks get made for the button power port placement. A little bit of time with a tiny saw, and then everything is ready to install. Until I realized the first battery is going to be a bit too big for the space available, so I go down a size. All the electrical stuff on the power level got connected and installed. These are little strips of wood covered in copper tape and solder that all the light wires are going to connect to for power. And so I don't have to remember anything, they got color coded. As the workspace got smaller, tweezers made it easier to keep things where they needed to be. The battery was a little thicker than expected, so some of the wood from the bottom of the light level got carefully removed. Damaging the filaments is the last thing I wanted to do right now. The wiring got connected to the power, and then it became a game of moving the wires around so that everything could get closed up without anything being smushed. I'm pretty sure smushed isn't a technical term, but if you know of a better one that's also family friendly, please leave it in the comments. Glued all the layers together and left it alone to dry. The snack for this episode is Quaker brown sugar oatmeal squares. It's supposed to be breakfast food, but for me, it works better as a snack because it would take forever to soak up any milk to get to the perfect percentage of cereal sogginess. Now that it's set up and solid, the sander and some hand tools smoothed out all the sides. Did a couple coats of black paint, and while that dried, a couple of magnets got installed in both feet. Last things to do were glue in the final acrylic, turn on the base and head power, and now it's fog machine time. Megatron and his base turned out really well. Thanks for watching, and if you like this, be sure to subscribe and check out some other projects. Regardless, grow the unique talents that you've been given and make for others.